Live streaming. There's some people online that are going to be watching. So if you could grab a seat here, we're going to get started in a couple of minutes. Do you want to do a little intro or?
No? I don't think so. Okay. I think we're ready to go.
Okay. People are just grabbing some coffee, I guess. Okay, we're going to get started here. Thanks everybody for joining. Before starting, I'd like to just do a brief land acknowledgement for Revelstoke. I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting today on the traditional territories of the Sinixt, Secwepemc, Silk, and Ktunaxa peoples, and so we thank them for allowing us to meet and learn together on their territory. I've got a presentation that talks about the draft development cost charges. And so I'll just move through this presentation here. Oh yeah, it's up on the screen. Good. So as an overview, I'm going to cover off some of the background. I'm going to cover off the DCC process and the timeline. What are DCCs, what they pay for, who pays, how they're calculated, talk about some of the growth projections and the projects and the costs, the draft DCC rates, and the results of applying various assist factors, and then touch on some comparisons and then the next steps. So in terms of background, the original bylaw was done in 2005. Charges were updated in 2008. There was an attempt at an update in 2018 that didn't proceed, and just a minor inflationary update in 2021. So we've got DCCs for water, roads, and sanitary sewer. And the DCCs, they differ by area right now. We've got some different DCCs for Central Revelstoke or the resort area or Big Eddy in the west side. Now, one of the important things about this DCC update is that a number of studies have recently been completed. There's been a transportation master plan, a water master plan, a liquid waste management plan, a parks and recreation master plan, and a stormwater master plan, and the official community plan. So this all provides us with great information on costs and projects required to service growth. So we've based a lot of our work on these master plans. In terms of the DCC process and the timeline, we've got a 5-phase process. We're in phase 4 right now, so we're getting closer towards the end of the process. The whole process takes 12 to 18 months, and we are moving along in that process towards completing phase 4. And then the next phase is phase 5, which is finalization and approval. In terms of DCCs, they're a means of pooling funds from a number of developers to pay for off-site capital works which benefit them all. So we have, and DCCs are really there to help pay for the cost of expanding and upgrading community infrastructure and to meet the needs of growth. In terms of what they can pay for water, sewer, storm drainage, transportation, parkland, and some limited park development. There have been some new changes to the Local Government Act that allow development cost charges for solid waste and recycling facilities and fire halls and police stations. And there's always been an option for resort regions to collect DCCs for employee housing. Now, all of these things in terms of development cost charges, they have to be related to the development itself. There's some items that DCCs can't pay for. They can't pay for regular operations and maintenance. They can't pay for engineering works needed for the existing population. Or there's a wide range of things like libraries and community centers and arenas and pools and sports field lighting and tennis courts and skateboard parks and pickleball courts that can't be paid for through development cost charges. There is another tool that's available now called an amenity cost charge, which has just been introduced that is possible to collect money for these types of things. but right now we're focused mainly on the development cost charges. In terms of who pays DCCs, it's applicants for subdivision approval to create single-family development sites, and also applicants for building permits to construct multifamily, commercial, industrial, and institutional development. I should also say that applicants for building permits to add on units in single-family areas would also pay at building permit stage. For example, if you're going to build an accessory dwelling unit, then that would be paid at building permit stage. In terms of calculating DCCs, one of the things that we focus on is the recoverable costs. So we take the total program costs and we subtract off the portion of the costs allocated to existing users. And I'll talk about that a little bit in terms of what that means. And then there's something called a municipal assist that you take off, and that ends up being the total cost that you're trying to recover from development cost charges. So in talking about benefit allocations, for each project, there's some benefit to the existing community and some benefit to new development. So sometimes you have a project that is going to address part of an existing situation. Suppose you've got an intersection that's getting overloaded, and part of that reason is because of existing traffic, but it also needs to be improved to deal with new traffic, so then you can split that cost between the existing community and the new development, which would be paid for through a development cost charge. So it's a kind of a technical number for the sharing of costs based on population or water flows or sewage flows. Water and sewage flows, they're great to use for doing these benefit allocations because you've got some really nice solid numbers. An example would be like a roads project that is servicing some new development, but it's going to benefit both new development and existing. And if at the end of the 20 years, maybe 29% of the population would be new and 71% existing, so we could say, let's allocate 29% of those costs to these roads. And so we take a look at every single project on the project list and think about, will this project benefit new growth, and what portion of it would benefit new growth? The assist factor is a completely different number, a completely different thing. And it's the percentage assistance provided by the city. The minimum is 1% because it's set out by legislation that you need to provide some level of assist. The assist factor is at council's discretion, and the whole community pays the assist factor. So if a project gets a 50% assist, then the community, which is really taxpayers or ratepayers, are paying for 50% of the water costs that are created by new development. In other words, taxpayers are providing a 50% subsidy to developers for water projects required by new development. So, and the assist can vary by service, but it can't vary by area of the community or land use. So you can't provide, say, higher assist for commercial development, for example. It can only vary by roads can be different than water. And so some communities think about reducing the DCCs by increasing the assist. So the higher the assist, the lower the DCC will be, but these projects are still required for growth, so taxpayers in the community need to pay for the projects for the assist amount. So we've got this DCC recoverable amount where we've kind of taken the costs, we've done the benefit allocation, what portion is allocated to growth, then we've got the assist amount if council wants to apply an assist. So we end up with this DCC recoverable cost, and we divide that by the growth. So we've got growth units, and that gives you the rate. So you're basically taking costs divided by unit, gives you cost per unit. So in terms of the process, we estimate the growth, we determine the costs, we determine the benefit factors, the municipal assist factor, and then we calculate those rates. Now, the growth projections, we've done then those based on the report that was done by Rennie Consulting that formed the basis for the official community plan. So the growth is based on growth projections that are consistent with what the official community plan has been based on, and also based on some development statistics from 2016 to 2023. We also had to project industrial, commercial, and institutional growth. So we did that based on some square footage data from the past number of years and from some data from Statistics from BC Stats by the province of BC. And so then we identified the number of each different type of unit and the projected growth for those various units. And we've kind of divided that up into different lot sizes and different multifamily sizes. And commercial, industrial, and institutional is paid by floor area. So that's the growth part of it. And then we have the project part of it. So we've got all these master plans. We looked through all the master plans, and that provided the draft costs for the development cost charges. So we've got a number of projects that we've kind of categorized here. We've got transportation projects, so we got bridge connections, bikeway projects, multi-use projects that are on-street, multi-use projects that are off-street, walkway spaces, intersection improvements, traffic calming. All of this is work that needs to be built, projects that need to be built in order to help us service new growth. And you can see, if you take a look at the list here, you can see that the total cost is 57 million, but the cost allocated to growth is 19.7 million. So that's the result of looking at each project and saying how much of this project should be allocated to growth and how much should be allocated to existing residents. So we're not taking all the projects and allocating that to growth, because some of them are needed just to repair what's there or to service existing needs. Maybe there's some existing deficiencies that have to be fixed. But we've thought about each project and how much should be allocated to growth. It's still a big number, though, even when you identify only the growth portion. Then with water, we've got some big projects there too, like twinning the Greeley Creek transmission main, which is important because it supplies water to the city. Treatment upgrades at the golf course well, some new wells and pump capacity. You got to construct some new pipe and connections and do some upsizing. You can see this is all required due to growth, but not all of it, because you can see with the benefit allocation, we've got about 30 million in total costs. About 21 million is due to growth, is the portion that's due to growth. And with sewer, similar situation. We've got some lift station upgrades and replacements. We've got a new force main. The biggest one by far is the wastewater treatment facility upgrades for phase 1 and 2. There's been a grant that the municipality has received, so we've subtracted off that grant amount, but that still leaves a significant number that needs to be covered off to deal with growth. And then a portion of phase 3, which is a phase that's coming further into the future, but we still want to start collecting for that project now in this time frame. And then there's a bit of remaining debt on the past sewer projects, which is just kind of a carryover from the previous development cost charge. And then with parks is a new development cost charge category. So we've got some specific upgrades to specific parks: Moose Park, Queen Elizabeth Park, Williamson's Lake Park, Nickel Road Park, and Powerhouse Road site. There's some trails on city-owned property and some property acquisition for those trails, and then some general amenities. So you can see, once again, when you look at the total cost, you've got like 5.8 million. The total cost allocated to growth is about 1.6, 1.7 million. So we've taken just a portion of those parks costs, because those parks are benefiting existing residents, but they're also going to benefit new residents. So, and we have these different DCC categories that I alluded to. So we've got the different lot sizes and different unit sizes that pay different amounts. And as an example of the DCCs, we've got the, say, residential B, which is a medium-sized residential lot. So you take, and this compares the existing DCC to the proposed development cost charge. When you add up the transportation, water, and sewer and parks for existing, you end up with about $13,000 per lot. When you look at all those items that are proposed in terms of amounts, you end up with about $42,000 per lot. So that's an increase of about $28,800 per lot, or a 220% increase, which is a significant increase, no question about it. And it represents about a 3.2% increase on a $900,000 home. If that's just an example, I mean, it'll vary depending on the example. So then when we combine all the different development cost charges, the water, the sewer, the roads, the parks, This table shows the list of all of the different development cost charges, all the different types, and the percentage change increase for each one. And you can see they're all in the kind of the 200%-ish range, which is, that's significant, no question about it. But part of the reason for that big increase is the development cost charges haven't been updated since 2008 in a real way. There was a minor increase in 2021, but so you've got all these years of increasing costs, and the costs of construction materials, of concrete and pipe and labor have really gone up significantly over that period of time. And indeed, if you had kind of done regular, inflationary increases as you went along, you'd probably be in the same spot in terms of the rates, but because they haven't been updated in such a long time, it ends up with such a dramatic increase. Now, we did look at assist factors and what would happen if we applied some additional assist factors. So, as I mentioned, it's at council's discretion. It's more of a political policy type of factor. And so we calculated the results of applying different assist factors of 10%, 20%, and 30% assist. And we also calculated the dollar amount that the city needs to make up from other sources like property taxes or water and sewer taxes. So the existing assist factor is 1% on the DCCs. Of course, the current DCCs are really out of date and are based on costs that are far too low. But so the actual assist is probably even less, but or even more. But because the costs are outdated, DCCs are only paying for a small portion of the costs to service growth, even though they're calculated based on a 1% assist. So we thought, what would be an example of this medium-sized residential lot if we had assist factors at 1%, 10%, 20%, and 30%? And you can see as you oh yeah, it shows up. You can see as you move from an assist factor of 1%, the rate goes from about $42,000 to, when you move to 10%, it drops down to about $37,000. 20% assist drops down to about $32,000, and a 30% assist drops to about $27,000. So the higher the assist goes, the lower the development cost charge goes. And also the increase, there's still significant increases, but instead of a 221% increase at 1%, at a 30% assist, you've got 113%. So the increase is not quite as dramatic as you increase the assist amount. And here's just kind of a table with all of the various assist factor options. And you can see as you shift over towards a higher percentage assist, you end up with less of a DCC increase. However, the assist factor needs to be made up from other sources. So if you have a 1% assist factor, the amount of assistance provided to new development over 20 years is about $620,000. At 10%, it goes up to $6.2 million. At 20%, it's about like $12.4 million. And at 30%, it's like $18.6 million. So you're providing $18.6 million worth of assistance over a 20-year period. And if we say spread that evenly over 20 years, although it'll probably go up and down, it's probably not perfectly even. But if you did, on an annual basis, you're looking at $31,000 a year, 1%. But then it goes up to $310,000 per year at 10%, $620,000 at 20%, and $930,000 at 30%. So that means that suppose you do a 30% assist, that means that the municipality needs to find another $930,000 a year in its budget. And oftentimes the way to find that additional money is to increase taxes or increase rates, or to reduce your spending on something else, or take it out of some other, like reduce spending on some other areas so you can provide this assistance. So it comes at a cost, these assist factors. And then we've got some comparisons with other communities of what would happen if you had this proposed DCC increase go ahead. How would we compare? Well, for sure, you'd be the highest amongst the resort communities which includes, Sun Peaks and Tofino and Whistler and Fernie and Radium Hot Springs and a number of other communities. So you'd definitely be on the high side, the highest. If you, and right now you're kind of in the mid-range, but you'd be the highest if you proceeded with these rates when you compare yourself to resort communities. When you compare to medium-sized interior communities like Lake Country, West Kelowna, Vernon, Kamloops, Cranbrook, you're still at the high end, but you're not the highest. There are definitely some that are a little bit higher, in like Lake Country, and some that are somewhat similar in terms of the amount. And then when you compare yourself to large growing communities like Langley and Surrey and Maple Ridge and Kelowna, then you're kind of definitely more in the mid-range. And that's partly because these larger growing communities, they need to make sure that they're updating their development cost charges on a really regular basis, because for them, if they're growing fairly quickly, then they're kind of losing out if they're not updating on a regular basis. And so these are kind of relatively updated and based on master plans and work that they've done, just like Revelstoke has done now in terms of master planning. So depends who you compare yourself with as to where that rate would put you. And another thing is that each community is unique. So while everybody kind of likes to compare, like, oh, how do we compare with other communities? It's each community is unique in terms of the infrastructure it needs and what it needs to build in order to deal with new growth. There's also the possibility for waivers and reductions, so you can waive or reduce DCCs for eligible development. And in the Local Government Act, it sets out the types of development, and it's not-for-profit rental housing or for-profit affordable rental housing, subdivision of small lots with low greenhouse gas emissions, and development designed to result in low environmental impacts. These waivers and reductions, though, they need to be paid from other sources, like taxpayers, but municipalities can consider these on a case-by-case basis. So if there's a specific case that can be made for not-for-profit or affordable rental housing, then the city could offer to waive the DCCs for those. And then in terms of next steps, council is going to consider the input that's been received. We do have some survey forms on the back. They're the same as the survey in on the website. So if you've answered the survey on the website, that's the same thing. But if you haven't had a chance to, you can, you're welcome to take one of those surveys and fill them out and get them back to us, or even this evening if you want. So we're going to compile all of the input that's received, and then we're going to go back to council and work with them on perhaps there's some fine-tuning or adjustments based on suggestions that have been made. Then we'll do a final report and a bylaw. Then it has to be submitted to the ministry for approval by the inspector of municipalities. That can take 2 or 3 months depending on their workload, and once it's approved, then council can adopt the new bylaw. So that concludes the presentation. Thank you for listening, and now we're open to any questions. And because it's live streamed, I think it's best if you come up to the mic so that the people online can hear any questions. And then also they can you can use the Slido app if you wish to type in your questions, and it'll pop up on this little screen over here. Oh, there's a question up there. Cool. Hold on, I just got to change my screen so I can see those. Okay, so a question. Oops, hold on, I just got to move this. Okay, why did you decide to divide by land size instead of house square footage? Yeah, so that's a good question. You can actually calculate your development cost charges based on a house's square footage. There's a few pros and cons of that. The pro is, yeah, you're kind of like nicely calibrating your charge compared to the actual size of the house that gets built. The con is that the municipality would have to wait a while before it receives that revenue, because when you do it at subdivision, because you can't do that on subdivision, you have to wait until building permit. Another con is that, or slight disadvantage, is that when you do it based on the house square footage, if it's like a single family type of home on an individual lot, then it's kind of like a person who buys a lot would come into the city and say, okay, now I want to get a building permit to build my home, and then they would be hit with this charge, which might be a surprise to some. Some people might be well aware of it, but for others it might be a surprise. Versus somebody who's subdividing land is probably more aware of that and would pay for that at the time of subdivision. And then when somebody buys the lot, that cost would have already been included in the cost of the lot, so they're not having to pay this extra charge that they perhaps were unaware of when they came in. But it is possible, and some communities have kind of gone that way to do it based more on the square footage of the house. Land size is kind of a bit of a proxy for house size. Like if you have a larger lot, you can build a larger house. If you've got a smaller lot, you can build a smaller house. Not that it's a perfect correlation. For sure, there are plenty of large lots with small homes. And although a very small lot, it's hard to build a really big house on a very small lot. So that's the answer to that question. Oh, and now we have another question. This is working good. What % assist factor are paid in other resort communities? I don't know the exact answer for that, but I know that in a lot of resort communities, it is generally the philosophy is growth should pay for growth, because you've got this new growth that's impacting their infrastructure in these resort communities. So I would think that a number of them are kind of in the 1% range. And indeed, most communities across BC have a 1% assist factor, because that's the minimum required. And it basically fits with the philosophy that growth should pay for growth. So that's a general philosophy that you see in a lot of communities. And the higher assist factors are usually, well, they're used a couple of ways. One is to kind of phase in increases, or they're used when some communities are facing some economic uncertainty or economic difficulty, and council says, you know what we're going to do? We're going to reduce the DCCs. We're going to absorb those costs, or the taxpayers are going to absorb that cost, and therefore we're going to set our assist factor a little higher to bring the DCCs down. So I don't know the exact answer to the % assist factor, but I just know from the work that we've done and that I've done over the years that generally they're aiming towards a 1% assist, but there might be some with a slightly higher assist. Okay. Any other questions? We really appreciate you coming up, because, a question up to the mic. Awesome. Thanks.
You mentioned that the developers were in today at a different session. Maybe you could share some insightful stuff that was discussed, or any new things that came up there that we would have missed not being here?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, we had some good discussions. One of them was, it kind of relates to the question that just came up, was could we somehow relate the DCCs a bit more to like the size of the unit? So maybe same with multifamily units or homes. So that was definitely something that was brought up as an idea to think about, and it's something that we do need to think about a bit more. There were a number of questions, and this is kind of a bit more technical, but clarification of kind of when the new rates would come into effect, and because as a developer or a builder, if you get your building permit application in or development permit application in before the bylaw is adopted, you would pay the old rate as long as you get your building permit issued within a 12-month period after the DCC bylaw is adopted. So that is an interesting thing to the development community to understand when do I need to get my application in order that I could pay the older rates, which are lower compared to the higher rates. Another thing that was discussed was there were some specific projects that we talked about and some discussions about, okay, should that project be a growth-related project or should that be a project that gets paid for by the existing community? So, and some discussion about the philosophy of how you approach that. You know, if you have some sort of an upgrade required to a facility, then, you know, and if that benefits the existing residents, how much of that should be apportioned to new growth? So a bit of discussion on that. I think there was also some discussion about being maybe a bit more nuanced in our categories to align with the goals of the you know, housing strategy, to make sure that we're kind of not discouraging new housing and not putting too much on in terms of costs onto new housing and new development. But we also talked about how it's a balancing act, because if you're saying, okay, we're trying to promote some more affordable housing in Revelstoke, adding these development cost charges definitely adds on to the cost of housing. But if you're trying to, say, reduce the amount of development cost charge, that means that taxpayers and ratepayers are having to pay more. So it's kind of a balancing act, and that's kind of like the tough balancing act that a municipal council is faced with having to do. So there was discussion about that. I don't know, Steve, any other things? Yeah, those are some of the highlights anyways. Yeah, it was a good discussion. Yeah. We got some good ideas, some things to think about, you know, that we can, as we're kind of moving forward with the actual bylaw and discussions with council. So it was a good discussion. Yep. Oh, another question. Is purchasing land factored into infrastructure projects? How is this determined? Assessed value per square meter. There was a very few land purchases. Most cases, the right-of-ways are owned. There is a land purchase for a stretch of trail required along the river that needs to be purchased. I think in most cases, the right-of-way or the land that the city has accommodates the infrastructure that's there. And the purchasing the land, it was based on, I think, assessed value for that. I think there was one chunk of land that I think was based on the assessed value. Yeah, assessed value. Pardon me? On the Illecillewaet River. Yeah, there's like a trail connection that just needs this little chunk of land. Okay, any other questions? See if we got anything coming from online. I don't see any popping up. Okay. Oh, one more. Okay.
All right, the discrepancy between 2008, those DCCs would have come in with a similar project, right? Assessing what was happening in the community, what was in the community's future. That would have been assessed through 2005 up into 2008 before adoption of that bylaw, I'd imagine. It seems like we're really clawing back quite a bit with a 220% increase. The resort was being planned at that time. Obviously, there would have been pushback from some people, but I don't know. 220% is a lot to digest, right? So.
Yeah, no question. That's a lot to digest, and it is quite a bit. back in 2008, well, 2005, with an adjustment in 2008, there was a fair bit of work that was done to determine what infrastructure was required. But now we've got new master plans and new plans that identify the infrastructure that's required now. Some of the reason why the 2008 was like the DCCs were a little bit on the low side is that the amount of growth was overestimated by quite a bit. So what happens is if you overestimate the amount of growth that's going to happen over a period of time, you end up taking these, the dollar cost of all the infrastructure and dividing it by a much bigger number, which ends up with a lower DCC. So if the growth had been kind of more realistic, the development cost charge back in 2008 or so would actually have been, a lot higher, and kind of we wouldn't have to have had quite as big a jump. And also, as I'd mentioned before, if the city had just made kind of these incremental increases for inflation as we went along, you're very close to where you are now because of the increases in various materials, pipe and concrete and labor as well, because the cost of those things has gone up quite a bit more than inflation. Like if you look back at the consumer price index, maybe it was like 2 or 3% back then, and even a couple of years ago, it got up as high as like 6 or 7%. But the costs for these inputs were going up. Like when it was 2 or 3% in inflation, they were going up like 5, 10%, and when there were some recent increases where you'd see like 20, 30% increases in these costs over a year. So we kind of like missed out on all those things. So we're just trying to get up to date with the costs.
Those numbers gave us that small pieces. With the master plan that we do this, which is tied to the growth projection of those regions that available. So we're saying that all these documents are wrong with the growth that's coming forward. The project goes down, because we have that on this, right? We know where types have to be outside. We know that if we follow the transportation area, we don't have to build the roads. So if we don't follow these plans, then that changes the dynamic of these speeds. So if we have to go to 4-lane through somewhere, we've got a $35 million Fourth Street Bridge replacement project. 4 lanes, 2 sidewalks, you're talking a lot more than that. Sure. So these plans provide the tool for us to use for this 20-year cycle. So we understand what things we need to build in order to support that growth with water supply or otherwise. Has to be a wastewater treatment plant, parks, creates that roads. What else we got? Oh, yeah, roads are. I think you're starting to get that. So, yeah, these are some of the lists, and those are all presented on reports. Right. But the real list that came out in 2005 was like, yeah, we think we need, without having the documentation that we have now. And so it's really important that you have these plans so that you're building something that the council has signed off on and the community knows is coming. Otherwise, it becomes more of a, do we want this or not? And developers hate that, right? They want to know, okay, what is the number? Because we have to make that part of our profit and loss statement, right? And so it's really beneficial for us to have all these tools in place for this development. And so as Joel said, in 2008, we had a DCC. if we did the CPI increase, we'd be about the same number that we are now. But the project list is so small that we would have more money to do those few projects, but we don't have all the projects that we need to build because we didn't know at that time. Now we know.
So then to follow up on that bylaw that they're potentially introducing, does that account for CPI? Like the figure that we have, like moving forward, are we going to start to account for that in a 3 or 5 year cycle over that 20-year span?
Yeah, I can answer that kind of relates to a question that's up here on the board as well. And maybe I'll just skip to that. In terms of the inflationary increases, the question is it possible to build in inflationary increases to the new bylaw so we avoid sticker shock like this in the future? We'd love to be able to do that. You can't actually build it into the bylaw, but what you need to do is you need to make sure that every year you do a little bit of a small increase. You are allowed, after you adopt your bylaw, for 4 years afterwards, you can apply the consumer price index without having to go through this extensive process. You just kind of apply that to the actual DCC rate itself. But another approach too is, like, every couple of years, just look at your project costs and give them a tweak or an adjustment. You might have to increase those a little bit, so then you're kind of keeping up. So it's more of a kind of a policy decision to make sure that we're going to do the CPI increase, and we're going to take a look at the project costs every couple of years, update them, and do a major update every 5 years. So you're basically kind of keeping up as you go along. There isn't a way to do it automatically. You have to actually do something. You gotta, like, even the CPI, Consumer Price Index increase, you have to do that as a bylaw each year. So yeah, which is just a healthy practice to do, but unfortunately, it's interesting. A lot of communities don't do it, and I'm not too, I guess it just kind of it just takes some discipline and some attention to make sure that you're focused on doing this every year, because it is a bit of a process, and so I think it just kind of slides by and doesn't get done. But I think with this, moving forward, I'm hoping that Revelstoke will make these regular increases, so then it'll make it easier in the future. Another question was how much approximately is in the DCC reserves, and I can tell you those numbers. We've got them here, because so we take the DCC reserves, what's in the reserves, and we subtract that off in terms of what needs to be collected for development cost charges. So in the transportation, and once again, these are a number of months out of date, and so when we do the final calculations, we get the most up-to-date reserve fund amounts. But anyways, the transportation has about 1.4 million in the DCC reserves. Water has about 3.7 million in the DCC reserves, and sewer has about 2.3 million in the DCC reserves. And there aren't any Parks DCC reserves because the Parks DCC hasn't been established yet. So that's approximately what's in the DCC reserves. Okay. Any other questions online? Okay, going once. Going twice. Going 3 times. Okay, I think that's it. No more questions coming in online or on the Slido app, and no further questions from the audience. Okay, thank you very much for showing your interest. We appreciate you coming out and checking this out. There is more information on the talkrevelstoke.ca website. All of the background reports, all of the calculations, the report that went to council, it's all there. And there's also a survey that you can fill out if you wish. So and we're also going to put these boards, the panels, on the website as well. So that's kind of like the portal for all the information. So everything you wanted to know about DCCs and more in Revelstoke is on that Talk Revelstoke website. Okay, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. I think that's it. Okay, bye. Oh, what's that? One more question. Oh, it popped up. Oh, okay. You added a $30 million sewer project that is being done right away, partly reduced by grant. How does that work without reserve money adequate? The main way that that works is you need to borrow the money. So if you borrow money, you can stretch the project costs out over time. So then the DCC costs are offsetting that as you're having to pay. So instead of having this big hunk of money that you have to pay all at once, you're paying it down over time as growth occurs. It may also be that part of that money has to come from other funds that the city has, and then the DCC reserve kind of pays back some of that amount. But the main way is that you have to borrow. So that's that question. Okay, now maybe. No more questions? Okay, I think we're done. Thank you very much. Yeah, we're here. You can come ask us a question. Directly, person to person. Okay. What's that?